In this video, I'm going to be changing all the fluids in this John Deere X485, and the first thing is greasing the tractor. On each of the spindles on either side, there's a grease zerk, and there's another grease zerk on the arm that's going to the hydraulic cylinder for your power steering. On the other side, there's going to be another grease zerk for the spindle, and down underneath on the other end of the steering cylinder, there's another grease zerk where you're going to be greasing, basically it's a little cup on the end. There's also a grease zerk for the front axle, and basically, it's easy to get to, no big problems. The last grease zerk is going to be on the drive shaft. And that's back under the tractor, and the drive shaft, to grease it is not going to be simple. And on this tractor, I don't think it was ever greased. And this is not unusual. People don't realize there's one back there, and even John Deere techs a lot of time won't grease them. It's a little bit of a problem to get back in there. If the mower deck is on, it's pretty near impossible. So that's something that there are going to be 5 grease points on the front end. And then you have this other one on the drive shaft. There's a U-joint on one end of the drive shaft. If for some reason the universal joint goes bad, that's probably going to be $300 to $500 for a new drive shaft. I haven't looked it up in a while, but they're going to be expensive. All you need to do is get the actual replacement parts, which John Deere doesn't list. You have to figure it out. But I know that in the past I've went to Napa, and you can get it's a UJ861, and that's going to give you the bearings and the cross piece. It's not real hard to replace that U-joint, but it does take a little effort. And I probably in the future I'll actually be making a video of doing that. I have some U-joints here I could use, for demo purposes. So I went to change the oil, and what I noticed, there was a piece that was missing. And basically, there's a hose that comes off the drain valve, and it's not necessary, but it's a whole lot easier to change your oil if you have that hose on there. And all you do is you take a 9mm wrench, and you're going to use that to open the valve. And this thing was so loose I didn't even need to use the wrench. The oil will drain a little faster if you remove the oil filler plug so that you can get some air into it. The next thing I'm going to be doing is putting in a hydrostat filter, and I'm going to be changing the fluid in the hydrostat. Okay, this tractor has a blue oil filter, which that is not a John Deere filter, and I'm not going to change the oil and not change the filter. Filter looks like it's pretty new, but that's not a John Deere filter, and filters do make a difference. So that's going to be one of my next thing, is changing that filter. This is a picture of my X740, and the steering spindles, you can have water migrate into them if you wash it or leave it outside a lot. And I've had tractors where they became so rusted I thought I had a steering cylinder problem, and it was just the amount of rust that was in that spindle. So the first thing I do is make sure you grease them, and grease them until the grease pops out and it'll push out any water. And I put these bearing buddies on all of my tractors. It's just an area where you can have a problem, and this is a simple solution. While I was waiting for the oil to drain out of the engine, I just thought I'd show you what I use to grease that universal joint in the back. The little grease gun, is much easier to handle, and whenever I'm trying to do something like that, I use the little one. The bigger grease gun is what I would use on the front end of the tractor, and if you have a loader or some other equipment. The grease in the little one, it's referred to as EP, extreme pressure, and this is a very high quality grease. It's going to be able to stand a lot of torque and pressure. And the universal joint is something that people forget to grease them, and this is a little insurance that, if I forget for a while, you're supposed to grease them about every 50 hours, I believe. And I grease mine more often than that, because if you ever have a problem, it can really cost you some money. Okay, the bigger grease gun, I use multi-purpose grease, MP, and for the front end of the tractor and pretty much everything else, it's going to be sufficient. For wheel bearings and many other things on a car, that grease is a lot cheaper than the EP version, but it's just a matter of, I could be using the same grease for everything. I have to have two grease guns because getting underneath there with the little one is much easier. So that's why I basically use two different types of grease. So next I'm going to remove the oil filter, and it's this blue canister. If it were a John Deere brand, it would be black. So I know just from the color that this is not a John Deere filter, and I didn't even put any pressure on this. It's that loose. I've never seen a tractor, the oil drain was loose, the oil filter wasn't even hand tight. It should have been, taken a little force to get it off of there. So I'm wondering, whoever was working on this tractor need to go to a little school as far as what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, one of the things I use for filters are these metal caps, and this is going to be a simple thing to use. It grips the filter much better, and I've tried a lot of different ones, and this is the best solution. A lot of times too, you can put, it's a 3/8 inch drive, you can put an extension on there to make things work a little better. So I've got the new filter, and whenever you have a filter, you always want to wipe a little oil around on the ring. And the reason is, that way, as you're installing it, it's going to slip, otherwise it might tear. And the other thing is, when you go to remove it, if you've got a little oil on there, it's not going to cause it to freeze onto the housing. I once bought my John Deere X740, and it had 500 hours, and the filter had never been changed. The oil had been changed, I could tell. The filter had never been changed, and I found out why. It was so hard to get off. I have this little metal cap wrench, that would just spin. So that's something that, you think taking a filter off might be a simple thing to do, and it, doesn't always work out that way. Right next to the oil filter is, you'll see this wire connecting to this device, and this is actually a pressure switch. This is what, if your light on your dash comes on, basically what it is, this switch is what's going to turn that on. And if you need to replace it, it's right here. It's very simple to get to. And be sure you don't cross thread the threads on the cap. When I took that other one off, I didn't even hardly put any pressure on it. It was that loose. When you tighten these up, basically you don't want to go too overboard. You want to just snug them up, and that's about all you're going to really need. So that seal in there, the reason it's there is to keep it from leaking. So don't go overboard as far as when you're trying to tighten that up. I'm going to be putting in some Valvoline 10W40, and this is a synthetic blend. It's not a full synthetic like Mobil 1 would be. The tractor actually is supposed to have 1030, and based on the compression of the engine, it's a little low. I'm going to use a higher weight, and basically that's going to help seal up the engine a little better. Anytime you have an engine with a lot of miles on it, you're basically using the oil to help kind of fill in, where there's wear on all the components inside. So it should take about 2 quarts, and I'll be doing that next. As you're pouring in the oil, you want to check underneath and make sure that you've closed the drain on the bottom of the engine and that your oil filter isn't leaking. On more than one occasion, I found that it was leaking, and it's because I didn't close the drain on the bottom. So, always check that as you're going to be putting in your oil, and then use a dipstick to check to see how much you're actually getting into the crankcase. When I first looked under the tractor, I noticed it looked like the engine oil had been leaking on the side where the oil filter is. And that's because when you remove the oil filter, all of the oil will run out of the filter and drain onto the frame. And so a little later I'm going to wash up the tractor, and actually I've got a degreaser I'm going to spray on there. And one of the reasons I will do that is just so that I'm sure that there isn't an oil leak somewhere in the engine I'm not aware of. So the next thing I'm going to attempt is to remove the hydrostatic oil filter and drain the oil. Okay, and this is just some of the wrenches that and filter tools that I've used, and basically the best one that I've found is the one that's the metal cap for most cases. I had one of these, and it's like a rubber band on a little handle, and that's pretty much useless. This is a metal strap that goes around the filter. This works fairly well, unless you have a filter that's really, really on there hard. In that case, I've got this vice grip plier that actually has like a roller chain with little tips on it, and you can put this around the filter, and basically, this is going to allow you to clamp it very tight. I've also got some large vice grip pliers. The thing I don't like about them is you tend to crush the filter, if you're trying to use those. The best place to grip the filter is on the very end of it. Not the threaded end, the other end. That's where there's more structural integrity, and that's where, if you're really trying to get a filter off and have a problem, that's where your best shot is. Last resort, and I have done this, is you take a screwdriver and you punch through the filter, and you use the filter or the screwdriver to twist the filter. So this is kind of a last resort. Don't like to do that. The vice grip here is probably, one of the best I've came up with for my last resort. I'm going to remove the filter, and I can already tell you that chances are I'm going to have just one heck of a time. It looks like the filter on there is the original filter. So I'll be taking a few snapshots as I go through this, but I don't think you need to, sit here and watch me drain oil. Okay, this is the underside of the tractor, and you can see the filter in the center there, and it looks like it's pretty rusted. There's hardly any paint on it. You can see a couple dings in it. So my guess is, again, that's the original, and it's probably going to be a little bit of fun getting that off. I'm sitting here thinking I might just take the rear wheel off so I can get under and get better leverage on it. Another reason I think this transmission fluid has never been changed, this is the drain plug on the back side of the transmission. And the drain plug, whenever you're going to be removing the drain plug, you're going to chip the paint on it and kind of round the corners on it a little bit. And this one doesn't look like it has ever been removed, so I'll be finding out for sure here in just a minute. In the left container, you'll see the motor oil that I removed from the engine. In the right container, this was the transmission fluid, and both of them definitely needed to be changed and hadn't been changed for quite a while. And I always like to take the filter out. I turned it upside down into a container just so I can see how much debris and maybe metal or whatever comes out of the filter. This was not a John Deere filter on the tractor, so I know that it was at least changed at one point in its lifetime. So that's the good news. I've actually seen tractors with 1,000 hours, 1,200 hours, 1,500 hours. They never changed the transmission fluid. It's supposed to be every 200 hours. If you don't change it, then you could be looking at, a transmission that is going to start slipping and have problems. So always make sure you change your fluid. I put in John Deere High Guard transmission fluid. High Guard is a little thicker than the other choice, which is the low viscosity High Guard. In cold temperatures, that's where using the low viscosity High Guard is going to be a little more advantageous if you're up in the frozen tundra of Minnesota or somewhere. That's where using the low viscosity would be a good choice. I live down near Atlanta, so it's much hotter, and the ambient temperature is how you decide which one you want to use. If you look in the technical manual, it does say that, High Guard is a preferred choice for my zone. So this tractor got High Guard, and we'll see what happens next. I forgot to mention that the oil dipstick is on the side of the engine, and it's right above where the red cable is going to the starter. The transmission dipstick and filler are basically on the fender deck, and you have to slide the seat forward to enable you to get the dipstick out, and that's also where you're going to be filling it from. You're always going to want to have the tractor warmed up when you change the engine and transmission oil. Okay, next I'm going to change the antifreeze in the radiator, and you want to make sure the engine is warm. The engine has to be warm so that the thermostat opens up so that it's going to allow the water antifreeze mixture to drain out. When you're draining, you also want to make sure that the cap on top of the radiator is removed so that air can basically get in there. Otherwise, it's not going to want to drain very fast. So next I'm going to go ahead and turn this little spigot and get the water out of the radiator. I'm then going to fill it back up with water, dump it again a couple times to get everything out of there before I actually go back and put antifreeze in it. So something that I picked up a while ago was that the engine is making kind of like a little bit of a grinding type of a noise, and basically I'm pretty sure that the problem is it has a fan. The water pump is built into the engine, but it has a fan mounted on the other end of the engine, and that's where there is a couple bearings in this fan, and I'm 99% sure that, I'm going to be changing those bearings. But that's something, just listening to a tractor, a lot of times you can pick up and figure out, some other problem areas. I changed the antifreeze, and I used Prestone 50/50. John Deere does have antifreeze, and in the technical manuals they do tell you there's a spec for antifreeze, and the Prestone 50/50 meets the spec, so you can use that. 50/50 protects you down to minus 34 degrees, and you don't want to go above 70% Prestone. That'll take you to 84. If you went with pure antifreeze, it wouldn't have as good a results as just putting in 70%. So the higher you go after 70, they say don't do that, and the reason is the actual freeze protection is not going up, it's going down.